On today's episode, we are taking a look at the 2016 Buick Encore. Now, our European friends may recognize this vehicle as the Opel Mokka. The Opel Mokka and the Buick Encore are closely related to the Chevy Trax, which we recently reviewed and you may recall was not really at the top of my shopping list. Part of the reason for that is that this vehicle exists in the United States, and this is actually my top pick in this segment. Part of the reason that I like the Buick is that this straddles the line between the mainstream subcompact crossovers and the luxury subcompact crossovers. So this is a little bit smaller and a lot less expensive than something like a BMW X1 or an Audi Q3, but it is a small step above in terms of price, something like a Honda HR-V, a Chevy Trax, or a Mazda CX-3. It's obvious when you look at the Encore head-on in this way that the Encore is not a terribly large vehicle. It's definitely a decent amount narrower than Buick's other crossovers in the United States, although they have given us the same sort of Buick design language. We have this sort of baleen whale-like grille right here, large headlamps, large fog lamps down here on the lower portion of the bumper. The large styling elements grafted onto the front of this fairly small crossover make the Encore look a little bit cartoonish in my estimation, but I actually think it makes the Encore look cute rather than cartoonish questionable. Be sure and let me know what you think about the looks down there in the comment section down below. I would love to know what you think. There was a time where Buick's Ventaports disappeared, but they've been resurrected for most modern Buicks. They no longer relate to the number of cylinders the vehicle has. Of course, we have 6 on our particular Buick here, even though there is a 4-cylinder turbo under the hood. As we see in basically every other subcompact crossover out there, we get a fairly short hood. That's to maximize the interior space. Because the Encore is only 168 inches long. This is a full foot shorter than a Honda Civic. It's also about 1 inch less than a Honda HR-V and a few inches shorter than a BMW X1 or an Audi Q3. Although this is shorter than your average compact sedan, you will find more headroom in the rear than most compact sedans out there because we have this fairly upright profile. You'll notice that the roofline does drop a little bit as we go towards the rear, but this is still much more upright than you find in your average compact sedan, even though the interior is not going to be quite as long. Now in the back, we do have this sloping rear glass hatch, which does cut practicality down versus something like a hatchback. So something like a subcompact or compact hatchback may actually have more room in the back in the cargo area than you'll find in a crossover like this. As we saw with the front end, the narrowness of the Encore makes the rear end look especially upright, perhaps even a little bit triangular. It has a sort of muscular flare out down here towards the bottom. We have these very large tail lamps and a single exhaust tip over there on the passenger side. Because we're in the sport model, we also have a spoiler on top of this rear hatchback right here just above the glass. For 2016, there are 2 completely different 1.4-liter 4-cylinder turbocharged engines under this hood. The first one is the same that we've seen for a while. It's 138 horsepower and 148 pound-feet of torque. The second one incorporates direct injection and start-stop system, and it produces 153 horsepower and 177 pound-feet of torque. That's the one that we're taking a look at right here. That is an 11% improvement in horsepower and a whopping 20% improvement in torque. The newer engine doesn't just produce more power, it also is more efficient than the outgoing engine. This particular model gets 28 miles per gallon city, 34 highway, and 30 combined because this is a front-wheel drive trim of the Encore. The comparable model with the older engine would be 25 miles per gallon city, 33 highway, and a combined average 2 miles per gallon lower than this at 28. As you'd expect from a model that sits between the mainstream and the luxury segments, front seat comfort sits between those 2 areas as well. We have a multi-way power driver's seat, but the recline mechanism is manual in this particular seat design. A decent improvement over the mainstream entries is that we actually get a 2-way adjustable lumbar support, which is something that most subcompact crossovers leave out. We also have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion, making it much easier for shorter or taller drivers to both find an ideal driving position. Helping keep costs down a little bit, the passenger seat in the Encore does not have the same kind of motion that the driver's seat does. In our model, it is a completely manual design. One of the main reasons for buying a subcompact crossover over a compact sedan is the rear seat area. Because even though this is shorter than something like a Honda Civic, I have considerably more headroom in the back. I actually have about 2 inches of headroom, and I'm 6 feet tall back here. Sitting right behind myself, I also have about 3 inches of legroom left. That means that this rear passenger compartment is actually better suited to adults than your average compact sedan like an Elantra, a Civic, etc. Even if I move over all the way to the right side of this vehicle, where this front seat is all the way back in its tracks, I had a 6'5" person up front, my knees are touching the seat back, but he could very easily have scooted this seat up a little bit further. allowing me to comfortably sit behind that taller person as well. Now, one of the big areas where this does differ from those larger vehicles is the middle seat. Obviously, this is not as wide as your average compact sedan, and that does mean that 3 adults in the back would be a little tricky. They'd have to be very comfortable with one another, but I still have about an inch of headroom, even though our model does have the optional sunroof. Something that's missing from other subcompact crossovers is a rear armrest. We also have cup holders in the back, which is a nice touch, along with storage bins in the doors. Now, the rear seats do flip and fold. The seat bottom cushion actually folds first, right like that, and then we can fold the rear seat down. It's a 60-40 folding design, and these are adjustable headrests. So first we have to push those down, then we can push this rear seat back into place. Once you've completed that maneuver, the rear seat back is completely level with the rear cargo area. Obviously, crossover shoppers are looking for cargo practicality, and that's definitely something that we find in the Encore, just like most compact crossovers. Under the sturdy cargo area load floor, you'll find a compact spare tire in our model and a subwoofer right there inside the spare tire. An interesting touch is that we actually have some additional room on each side of the tire. We actually have some storage dividers here as well, but you could put a full-size spare tire in this area if you wanted to. It is actually deep enough. The compact spare tire is actually on top of a small block of foam in order to raise it up to that level. On each side of the rear cargo area, we do find 2 grocery bag holders and an enclosed storage bin on this particular side. It is an open storage bin on the other. Having rear seats that fold down so you can put cargo right here into the rear passenger area is not unusual, but the Encore does have another trick up its sleeve. That's because, like we see in certain other European vehicles, most notably Volvo models, this front seat folds completely forward like that. This is an awful lot more convenient than what we see in the Honda HR-V. In the Honda HR-V, they just recline the seat all the way back, and then you have to put your cargo on top of the front of the seat upholstery. On this, we actually have a hard plastic back that's really designed for cargo to be loaded on top of it. That means that if you have large items from IKEA, you can actually put them straight into the vehicle in this manner. It also means that if you don't have anybody sitting in the front passenger seat, you can fold this down and give the rear passengers a little bit better view of the road. Thanks to the size of this cargo area and especially that fold-flat front passenger seat, the Encore scores 10 out of 10 points when it comes to my exclusive trunk comfort index. Inside the cabin is where you'll notice the biggest difference between the Encore and the rest of the mainstream subcompact crossovers, because we have build quality and parts quality that's definitely higher than you find in the HR-V or the CX-3, or even the closely related Chevy Trax. We are in the sport model. That means we have leatherette and fabric combination seats, although you can get leather seats in upper end trims. Moving on over to the front doors, you'll notice a high percentage of soft touch plastics compared to some of those other competitors, and of course, imitation wood trim. We have some small storage cubbies right here below that armrest, and then towards the bottom of the door, we have a cup holder and an additional storage bin as well. Moving over to the dashboard, you'll find, again, more of that same fake wood trim going on from the doors all the way on over to the dashboard, and basically everything above that is a soft touch plastic. So we actually have a soft touch dashboard, soft touch cover to this upper glove compartment right here. It's a dual glove box arrangement. Can easily fit a smartphone inside this upper glove box, and then we have a bin style lower glove compartment that is able to accommodate a large tablet computer, but not some of the extra large tablet computers that we see recently. Mounted high and fairly far away from the driver and front passenger is this infotainment screen. Our model does have the optional navigation software in addition to the standard infotainment system. Now, this is one of GM's older infotainment software designs. It's going to be completely replaced for 2017, and the screen will move a great deal closer to the driver and front passenger. It'll be positioned right around here in the dashboard. That will enable the use of a touch screen instead of this fixed screen. Below the screen, we find 2 large air vents with control knobs here to open and close them, traction control, hazard light button, and then it's obvious this is one of GM's older infotainment systems because we do have a million buttons right here on the dashboard. Similar to other infotainment and navigation screens, we have this control knob right here that rotates around, and then we have a joystick in the center that toggles side to side and up to down in the screen as well. However, what's different about this is that in order to click enter, you actually click on this ring right like that. You don't click in the center of the button. You actually have to click that ring itself. Below the climate control, we have 2 storage bins, one that holds things like credit cards, cell phones, that sort of things right in there. Then we have a larger bin with a 12-volt power port, USB port, and auxiliary input. You can easily put cell phones and that sort of thing in that bin, although it does not close. As we see in the Chevy Trax, we do have a fairly typical console shifter. We have a drive mode, and then if we click all the way down, we have a manual mode as well. And then you use the buttons on the top of the shifter itself to actually change the gear. Press this button obviously for up and that button for down. Between the front seats, we have two large cup holders. One is actually slightly larger than the other, but both were able to accommodate large takeout sodas. We have a handbrake right here, and the release button, interestingly, is on the top of this rather than at the end. Moving behind that, we find a single armrest just on the driver's seat right there that lifts up to reveal a small storage cubby. It has a roller top, and you can fit a variety of things in there, mostly wallet-sized or cell phone-sized. On the driver's side, we have a 4-dial instrument cluster with tachometer on the left, speedometer on the right, fuel gauge and engine temperature above a small multifunction display. Now, this is not a color display in our particular model, although we do expect to see one for the 2017 model year. That display is controlled via the turn signal stalk, as we see in some of GM's older vehicles. So we have a toggle ring right here, a menu button, and then a set clear button right at the end of the stalk. The toggle ring is used to switch between the various options on each page. So right now we're on the vehicle information page. So we have trip computer information, we have our speed, navigation, timer, average vehicle speed, all that sort of thing going on right there. We hit the menu button for switching between the menus. So right now we have oil remaining life, tire pressure, you can change the units, etc. And you would press the set clear button at the end to reset things like that oil life display. At the bottom of the display, you'll find the odometer as well as the transmission mode indicator, including manual modes right there, manual 1, 2, or 3, and a compass on the lower right. The steering wheel is one of General Motors' older designs, but it's still fairly attractive for the mainstream segment. We have a large airbag cover right here that sort of acts like a third large spoke at the bottom of the steering wheel. We have sport grips on either side up towards the top, and ours is leather wrapped in this model. Volume up-down toggle on the right, as well as track up-down and a source select button right there in the middle. You just click down on that button. Then we have phone hang-up, pickup that also act as mute and voice command, and then you'll find the cruise control buttons on the left. The base engine in the Encore is not terribly powerful. As a result, acceleration figures end up on the slower side of the mainstream segment. The sport model that we've been driving makes a significant difference when it comes to acceleration times. This one went from 0 to 60 in 8.7 seconds. That's nearly a full second faster than the base engine. However, you will still find certain mainstream entries and definitely luxury entries that are faster than this. Something like a Mercedes GLA 250 is going to be about 2 seconds faster than this 0 to 60, and even something like the Q3, which is slow for the luxury segment, is going to be about a full second faster 0 to 60 than this. On the flip side, the Encore is very light, and that definitely pays dividends when it comes to braking and handling scores. This vehicle went from 60 to 0 in 119 feet, which is very, very short. You can thank the tires, the suspension design, as well as the overall vehicle weight for that. This weighs between 3,200 and 3,300 pounds, depending on the options that you get and whether or not you get all-wheel drive. The Encore handles more like a European hatchback than your average crossover. Of course, there's a reason for that. This is an Opel Mokka, so of course the suspension was designed by General Motors' European division, and it definitely has that solid European feel to it. We don't get quite as much steering feedback as I would like, not quite as much as we see in the Mazda CX-3, but we do get more steering feedback than we find in most subcompact vehicles. This definitely has the same sort of feel that we see in certain luxury front-wheel drive vehicles. Even though the handling is excellent, the ride is not as firm as I would have suspected. Generally, in order to get excellent handling, you do have to have a firmer ride, and this has a very good balance as far as vehicles go. Now, obviously, subcompact crossovers like this are not going to ride as well as compact crossovers or compact sedans because the vehicle is just not as long. The difference is especially noticeable if you're out on washboard pavement or freeway expansion joints that are quite large. You can sort of get this bobble-headed sort of feeling inside the Encore, just like you get in every other subcompact crossover. Cabin noise is an area where Buick has traditionally excelled, and this is no different. We scored 70 decibels at 50 miles an hour in this cabin, which makes this the quietest in the mainstream subcompact crossover segment and approximately equal to what we see in the Audi Q3 or the BMW X1. This is a fairly quiet cabin for the price tag. The Encore also does well when it comes to fuel economy. Keep in mind we do have a traditional 6-speed automatic transmission up front, so our 28 mile per gallon average over a week of mixed driving in this vehicle is actually quite good. Now you will see a slightly better fuel economy number, especially in those models with CVTs, but this does very well for itself and has a very traditional sporty feel to it. This definitely feels more engaging than your average continuously variable transmission, and I think a 1 to 2 mile per gallon difference is a worthy trade-off. This does have the start-stop system, so it will improve city mileage if you live in an area where you will allow the start-stop to happen. Obviously, if you live in a very hot climate and you need the air conditioning going all the time, this vehicle won't stop the engine because it's trying to keep you cool, and therefore you will get slightly lower fuel economy in the city. The start-stop system is one of the big reasons that this engine gets slightly better fuel economy than the base engine design, because the base one does not have this start-stop system in it. When it comes to pricing, it's important to remember that the Buick will offer more options and more features and more luxury gadgets than you'll find in a mainstream entry, but less than your typical full luxury entry. This starts at $24,065 in the base trim, and that gives you the 138 horsepower engine. If you want all-wheel drive, you can add it for $1,500 to basically every model. The next step up from there is the convenience trim, which adds cross-traffic detection, blind spot monitoring, and 2-zone automatic climate control for $27,280. Keep in mind that the 6-speed automatic transmission is standard on all Buick models, and in this particular segment, the mainstream entries make you pay extra for that automatic transmission, so that does help eat up some of the delta between this and the average mainstream entry. The model we've been taking a look at right here, which is the 153 horsepower sport trim, is $28,275. It gives you basically the same options that we've had in the other trims below it, and a unique 18-inch wheel option, along with a spoiler and a few other tweaks visually. If you want leather in your Encore, then that will set you back $29,225, and it also brings with it a heated steering wheel, heated seats, and 6-way power seats up front. You should also keep in mind that the interior that we've been showing you in the Encore, as far as the way the dash is put together, the quality of the materials, the type of materials, etc., that's all consistent all the way on up in the Buick Encore. We don't start out with hard plastics on the dashboard and then work our way up into soft touch plastics like you do find in some of the competition. If you want your Encore fully loaded, it will set you back $30,710, although it will still be using that base 138 horsepower engine. It will, however, include the Bose premium audio system, forward collision warning, and parking sensors. Comparisons are a little bit tricky with the Encore because there aren't too many entries that have the same sort of price range or the same sort of feature set that we're seeing in the Encore. However, there are a variety of vehicles you could compare this with. Anything from a Kia Soul to a Honda HR-V, Mazda CX-3, on up to a Mercedes-Benz GLA, BMW X1, or Audi Q3. This slots right in between those two pools of vehicles. A Mazda CX-3 starts at $19,960, the Honda HR-V at $19,215. Keep in mind, however, this does have a standard automatic transmission and about $4,000 more standard equipment than you find in the HR-V. That means that although this is about $4,000 more expensive than the HR-V, if you adjust for the feature content, they're right about the same. Put in another way, if you want to get these same kind of options in your Honda, you're going to have to pay about the same price as you would for the Buick. On the luxury side of the spectrum, we have something like the Audi Q3, which starts at $33,700, and the GLA at $32,500 from Mercedes. Both of those vehicles will be significantly faster 0 to 60 than the Encore. Both do offer a few more standard luxury features, but they're significantly more expensive. And actually, depending on how you configure your Encore, that delta actually grows when you compare it with the luxury segment. So a fully loaded Encore, the difference between it and a Mercedes-Benz GLA with the same sort of feature set, it'll actually be a larger delta than comparing this to a base version of the GLA. In some ways, you could compare this to the Mini Clubman. The Clubman is not a crossover, however. It's just Mini's largest four-door hatchback, so it's not quite the same sort of thing going on in this vehicle. The trouble with Clubman comparisons, however, is that it may start about the same price as the Encore, but it accelerates on up to about $50,000 very rapidly, and that's $20,000 more than the top-end Buick Encore. Part of the reason on the Mini side is just the sheer number of options available in every Mini model in the United States. But the other half of the problem is the cost of those options, because configuring your Mini the same as we have this particular version right here, it's definitely going to be more expensive. The Mini is not necessarily going to be that much faster either in most trims, because it does use that less powerful 3-cylinder engine that definitely takes a decent amount of time to get from 0 to 60, just like the base version of the Encore. In my mind, the comparisons that are the easiest make the most sense. This versus something like a Mazda CX-3, a Kia Soul, Honda HR-V, etc., the Buick is a rational upgrade. Not only is it a rational upgrade in terms of feature content and luxury options, but it doesn't really cost you much to make that upgrade, especially if you're taking a look at medium-level trims of the competition. A large portion of the $4,000 delta between the Honda and the Buick can be seen in the fact that this has 4 more airbags than we get in the Honda. We actually have side thorax bags that protect your hip and chest area right down here rather than just your head in the rear. We also have the same up front, and we have knee airbags up front that we don't find in the Honda. The automatic transmission is also standard in this vehicle, as is OnStar. The rest of the difference is, of course, eaten up in the various features and functions that we get in the vehicle. And of course, you have to keep in mind we do have a turbocharged engine under the hood, not a naturally aspirated engine like we find in the HR-V. It results in a very different driving dynamic. This is going to be more entertaining to drive than the HR-V with its CVT transmission, even though the base model is not really going to be that much faster 0 to 60. When it comes to driving excitement, the CX-3 is an awful lot of fun to drive out on the road, but it's not going to hold the road any better than the Encore. The Encore actually has an excellently tuned suspension. Again, this is the Buick version of the Opel Mocha, which is sold in Europe. It was actually designed by General Motors' European design team. The suspension was all designed by the European design team as well, and that translates right back here to the Buick version. This actually handles and feels very much like a European front-wheel drive hatchback on the road, which is actually quite similar to the way the Mazda CX-3 drives as well. The Mazda CX-3 may be a little bit faster 0 to 60 at 8.3 seconds, but this version that we're taking a look at right here, which is the Sport trim, is just about as fast 0 to 60. In order to get the sexy side profile that we see in the CX-3, the rear passenger compartment is definitely more limited, especially in terms of headroom, and the cargo area is significantly smaller than the Encore, or basically any of the other entries in that segment. Although Kia is obviously not a luxury badge, you actually can get more luxury features inside your Soul than you'll find in the Encore. Things like ventilated seats, Napa leather trim, etc. You'll find those in the Soul, but you won't find them in the Encore. The Soul will also be a little bit less expensive because fully loaded with all of those options like the Napa leather, etc., it'll end up about $3,000 less than a Buick Encore in its top-end trim. But as I said, the Soul is not really the same sort of thing. It is a boxy, very practical hatchback, and as a result, there are a few compromises. The rear suspension design is not a fully independent design like we see in basically every other subcompact crossover. That means this has a much better driving dynamic out on the road, even though it may not necessarily hold the road any better than that Kia Soul. Top-end versions of the Kia Soul get crazy wide tires, but if you put those same width tires on the Encore, this would not only feel better, it would also handle better out on the road. But again, they're not quite the same sort of vehicle. The luxury subcompacts will be nicer on the inside. They'll have real wood trim, they'll have more powerful engines, they'll go from 0 to 60 faster, they'll road hold better, but they will be at least $10,000 more expensive than a Buick Encore. So in a way, the Buick Encore could be the rational value option to something like a GLA or a Q3. I actually think this is a smoother ride than the GLA. The GLA is probably my least favorite luxury subcompact crossover. I would take this before I took the GLA. The transmission's smoother, the overall ride's smoother, although the interior is definitely a step below what we see in the Mercedes. As I've told friends and family, the Encore is one of my favorite subcompact crossovers. It mainly boils down to the interior and the driving dynamics. Obviously, the engine is not that exciting because this still goes 0 to 60 considerably slower than the luxury entries or even some of the subcompact crossovers in the mainstream segment. However, this vehicle has one of the best interiors. It has a very comfortable seat. It's very practical on the inside thanks to that fold-flat front passenger seat as well. In addition to that, the fuel economy is excellent and the pricing is very, very well done. Again, this is about $4,000 more than your average mainstream subcompact crossover, but it has about $4,000 more equipment inside. That's a really strong value proposition, again, before we even take into account the warranty that we get on the Buick, which is frequently higher than we find in most of those mainstream options. In a weird sort of way, the Buick Encore itself is one of the reasons that the Chevy Trax is one of my least favorite entries in the subcompact crossover segment. A lot of what I like about the Buick Encore has actually been removed, especially on the inside. I think the Encore is more attractive than the Trax as well, but the big thing comes down to the value. Of course, I will end this video by reminding you that there will be a 2017 Buick Encore that is getting a serious number of changes. Most notably on the interior, we have the latest infotainment and navigation system from Buick, which is a touchscreen model that will have Android Auto and Apple CarPlay support. So if you're looking for the best entry in the segment, I would actually say wait for that new 2017 model. If, however, you're looking for a value upgrade to something like a CX-3 or an HR-V, go ahead and get the Buick Encore now. You'll probably get a really good deal on the 2016 Encore in the next few months because that new model's coming out. So I suspect it'll actually narrow that delta of $4,000 or so between this and the HR-V down to perhaps $2,000 to $3,000, which is a much better buy. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes. Be sure and check out those related videos on the side of your screen. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so, and I'll see you next week.